Hello and welcome to Modinomics 2024. I'm Siddharth Zarabi and you're watching our coverage of the interim budget for 2024-25. Hours left for it, and joining me now a panel of top industry experts, CEOs. R. Dinesh, the chairman of TVS Supply Chain Solutions. He's the president of the Confederation of Indian Industry, CII. Also with us, Sanjiv Puri, the chairman and managing director of ITC Limited and the president designate at CII. With us, Chandrajit Banerjee, the director general of CII. Before I go across to my guests for their budget expectations, I want to play out for you viewers what Prime Minister Narendra Modi said earlier at the beginning of the budget session of Parliament. Let's take a quick listen in.
आप तो जानते ही हैं कि जब चुनाव का समय निकट होता है तब आम तौर पर पूर्ण बजट नहीं रखा जाता है। हम भी उसी परंपरा का निर्वाह करते हुए पूर्ण बजट नई सरकार बनने के बाद आपके समक्ष लेकर के आएंगे। इस बार एक दिशा निर्देशक बातें लेकर के देश की वित्त मंत्री निर्मला जी हम सबके सामने कल अपना बजट पेश करने वाली है। साथियों, मुझे विश्वास है कि देश नित्य प्रगति की नई नई ऊंचाइयों को पार करता हुआ आगे बढ़ रहा है। सर्वस्पर्शी विकास हो रहा है, सर्वांगीण विकास हो रहा है, सर्वसमावेशक विकास हो रहा है। ये यात्रा जनता जनार्दन के आशीर्वाद से निरंतर बनी रहेगी। इसी विश्वास के साथ फिर आप सभी को मेरा राम राम।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi there clearly saying that the interim budget will provide a policy direction, and in some ways saying that it will be a continuation, because making that very confident and a remark about how the full budget will be presented in July. And that's the view from the Prime Minister. The markets, industry and many stakeholders have virtually completely baked in a return and a third term for Prime Minister Narendra Modi. And on that note, I'll go across to Mr. Dinesh. Mr. Dinesh, an interim budget, but 2019 taught us that the government can also respond both to the situation and also keep an eye on the evolving situation as far as the macroeconomy is concerned. What are your expectations from this interim budget?
Thank you, Siddharth. And actually, if you look at it, I think as you rightly said, this government really has kept to a correct focus on both what is needed for the economy and also for making sure there is equitable growth. And the 2019 example is a perfect example of that. So if I look at today, I think our expectations is that there will be a continued focus on the infrastructure side. We have said about 20% growth and 12 lakh crore capex. And we believe that is something which will make sure that the economy continues to be turbocharged as it has happened in the past. The second issue is with regard to making sure there is a continued focus on equitable growth. Here there is the focus of the government has been brilliant in terms of making sure, whether it be for the benefit of the population which has not had access to the direct benefit transfers, and also the focus on the medium and small scale enterprises, which has been something which both from CII side and from the economic requirement of this nation, that is the continued focus. So for me, it's continuity, making sure there is fiscal discipline maintained, which this government has done very well, but at the same time, make sure that the support is given where it is required.
Sanjiv Puri, the month of January started off with Davos, where there was a ringing endorsement for India from practically everyone that I met, and all of you also would share that view. And we then saw, after Davos, we saw devotion, and now the focus is on the deficit. You understand the pulse of Bharat and the rural economy more than anyone else. What is your key expectation as far as the rural part of the economy and consumption is concerned?
So thank you, Rab. To start off with, let me also say that I think what has been done so far is absolutely in the right direction. And as they say, the proof of the pudding is in eating it. And you can look at all the indices. The multi-dimensional indices are all indicating a very positive story. And that's why what you narrated happened at Davos. So things are definitely in the right direction. The right policy instruments, the right interventions and the budgets are being made, and we are on the right path. Having said that, I think we must also recognize that the nation had to go through certain very severe stresses on account of COVID, on account of certain geopolitical developments which caused a huge runaway inflation, and then also on account of extreme weather events. Having said that, of course, India has managed inflation much better than the rest of the world. But nonetheless, these are challenges that we have had to contend with. So in that context, I think while everything is in the right direction, I think I would be happy to see maybe perhaps greater impetus on rural infrastructure. I think the states also play an important role there. So maybe more incentives or what has been done so far, more of that for the states. I think the higher MSP, the bonuses that are being given in the crops that are going to help. Greater focus on bringing in agriculture resilience through irrigation and other modern practices, because that's one area that's hitting the rural economy the most. I think there are also policy interventions pertaining to wood-based industry. Once these are executed, I think that can create a quick rural employment, because India, because of the growth in, for example, real estate, is starting to import wood. So there are many enablers in place. I think some of them, it's a matter of time when we execute it and take off with it. And in certain areas, what I would really suggest is perhaps some more resources which are targeted at the rural area.
Chandrajit Banerjee, not only do you meet with and speak with foreign investors, but you also get to hear from a very wide cross-section of Indian industry, and they are driving growth in many ways, although there is still an expectation that when will the private sector step up its investment, especially in the infrastructure space. What's your own sense about how keenly the private sector is looking at the next impetus to growth?
So, there are two aspects of this. One is the private sector itself. I would think today in our feedback from industry, the general capacity utilization, if you see across sectors, varies between 75 to 100%, which is a big number, which is a very critical number to sort of understand. And therefore, private sector there is already, this talk has been there for some time, is private sector investing. So my answer very clearly is that yes, in certain sectors, private sector, we are seeing have already started their new expansion plans, their new investments. We see it in areas like cement, we see it in pharma, we have seen it in capital goods, we're seeing it across many other sectors. So that's one. Secondly, given the type of policy thrust that the governments have had during the COVID and post-COVID on capex, and with the increase and the focus on capex remaining, I think the private sector expansion plans, which are very much in the boardrooms, will see reality. I want to speak about another aspect of this is we've seen a lot of focus on the central capex very strongly. We would need to see some of the states really, some of the states have done well, but we need to see more states coming in into that type of the capex spend also from the states, which will really help much more in terms of industries downstream. The support which is required now is also to see how we are helping our small and medium companies. And I would think that when I hear from the small and medium companies, as you're saying, across the sectors, we need to see how we are able to support them to transform, digitally transform, because today when the large companies are digitally transforming, there is need for us to help the small and the mid-sized companies to also go into that digital transformation for technology, which will enable them to be not only just expanding, but also remaining in the supply chain very strongly. The second part that we also required support for the small scale,
right,
I would say, very essentially, is when we talk about green and the green transition that is required for them, so that they are able to be also into the global play, which is so much important because they contribute very strongly to employment generation as well as to exports. So I'll stay with that much because that's going to be a critical change that we will see going forward.
Dinesh, one of the key elements that we see from all the data leading up into this budget is the fact that services and services exports have done very well. But the main thrust of the government over the recent past, including through PLI schemes, has been on manufacturing. In your own assessment, how has that fared? And is the interim budget an occasion for the government also to signal some further intent as far as the PLI is concerned?
Yes, and that's a very good point. I think the focus on manufacturing has happened because that is something which needs to grow hand in hand with the services. And the PLI scheme is, I would call it, right approach to make sure that we are not just incentivizing, but people who are coming in here, looking at the domestic market and also wanting to invest in India because it is competitive, also get, I would call it, the sweetener in terms of the visibility of the support which the government is ready to give for them to come to India and invest in India. It's work in progress, so we believe actually it should be extended for a further period. And equally important out of this manufacturing growth is jobs. So for us from CII side, we have actually recommended that we also introduce a potential employment-linked incentive plan, which covers the support services, especially for both manufacturing and making sure the infrastructure is available and supporting the growth in manufacturing. So it could include logistics, it could include health, it could include tourism. So all of those sectors where there's a significant employment generation opportunity. So PLI and focus on manufacturing is essential. It is starting to deliver the goods, and it will need further support and further hand-holding to make sure that not just global companies are investing in India, but even Indian companies are able to invest at scale for the global markets from India for the growth of the manufacturing sector.
Okay. Sanjiv Puri, in 2019, we saw some changes as far as tax is concerned, and then we saw a big one, the PM Kisan Nidhi. The expectation this time is perhaps the quantum of funds that are allocated to that will increase along with the rural wage employment guarantee program. Do you think that more focus and fund allocation needs to happen to boost consumption, especially in rural India, and should the interim budget via some tax tweaks attempt that?
I think it's a very important point that you have brought up. Certainly considering that there has been a passage of 5 years since that time, and there is also the aspect of inflation that the economy has to contend with. There is some merit in re-looking at quantums. And in similar way, I would say there is some merit in looking at the giving some relief to people, particularly at the lower end of the income brackets.
Okay. Mr. Puri, one more point, and I want this in follow-up. One of the issues with inflation has been the supply side shock that we saw on account of COVID. Companies then had to make adjustments, and some of the burden did get passed on to the consumer. The government on its part, for example, has tried to absorb some of the burden through keeping petrol and diesel prices stable. As far as inflation is concerned, do you think that this is still a significant worry on the ground, or is the worst behind us and that will therefore allow both the government and the RBI to take a more sanguine view of this matter in the months ahead?
So I do believe that the worst is behind us, and we are also seeing that the inflation now is within the band of tolerance. It is 5.7%. The core inflation is in fact below 4%. So I think that space is certainly much better than what it was in the past. Having said that, the key risk is right now, on one hand, it is the geopolitical developments, and we have seen more of it in the recent past. And the other monitorable is, of course, the impact of extreme weather events. Though I must say that, the government also has taken a lot of proactive steps to make the right information and the right advice available to farmers. But nonetheless, this is something that we need to keep a close eye on, because that can cause sometimes a problem if it impacts crops in a big way. So far, the situation is good. The wheat crop is looking good. I think the sowing also is a little better than what it was last year, and everything with respect to that seems fine.
All right. Chandrajit Banerjee, what are the concerns that Indian industry has at this point of time? And perhaps not all of them can be solved through budgets, and certainly not through an interim budget. But just for our viewers to understand, what bothers, if at all, Indian industry at this point of time?
Well, we will always continue to ask for more. There will be, over the last few interventions that we have seen during the budget and for even outside of the budget, there have been many important policy interventions which have been done to create a lot in terms of ease of doing business, etc., etc. But yes, of course, there will be much more to ask for. But I will really talk about a couple of points. One is we've seen reforms, the direction of reforms to be very strong at the central level. We have seen at the state level, signals which are mixed. In certain states, we have seen phenomenal pickup, phenomenal turnarounds, if I can say. I would think that the state-level reforms need to be powerful in many areas, be it agri, be it power, be it labor, be it, and some of the states especially. We would like to see that moving ahead very strongly. There have been some very good coordination. I mean, one of the best examples of a coordination that we have seen in the recent past have been the GST and the success of the GST. So if that can be replicated for a center-state coordination and the states really folding in to really reform, that would be very important. And I talked about the second part is that the state-level finances, the prudent spending, more effective spending by the states, more targeted ones, so that we can take advantage. I would really like to talk about one more area which I think is going to be critical for India. See, today it's not just about what we are doing in India. The geopolitical situation, the geoeconomic situation has got a lot to do with what Indian industry or investments into India would be responding to. So I would really look at going forward a much more watchful eye towards what's happening on the geoeconomic side, the trade dynamics that's playing around and all of that. So I would really think that something like a National Economic Security Board under the NSC, which will really watch and work strategically with the industry to see how we have our footprints and our chains very strong across the world,
right,
to be strategically very important. So when we see policy directions in the interim budget, one would look out for these ones.
Okay, that's a good point on the National Economic Security Board. And you also referred to steps outside the budget, and viewers, import duties have been tweaked on mobile phone parts, and that's just 24 hours before the budget. Just continuing to prove the point that as far as the Modi government is concerned and Modinomics is concerned, the budget is just one event in a calendar, and decisions are taken as and when they need to be taken. I will go across to my panel one more time quickly, and I want to ask all of you, starting with you, Mr. Dinesh, that one of the key things in the last 10 years is the banking cleanup. And that banking cleanup, especially of the public sector banks, has meant that funds are available for a whole lot of activities. That was the biggest dark cloud over the Indian economy. What's your own sense that if I were to ask you to give rate the Modi government's performance on the banking front over the last 10 years, what kind of rating would you provide? Dinesh, that question was for you.
Thank you. So if you look at, you rightly mentioned that the bank's balance sheet are very, very strong as we speak today. And that bodes well for us from an approach perspective. And there are 3-4 reasons why it's very important. It is not just supporting the growth which we are looking for, but also the fact that as we move towards the climate transition, as we move towards the MSME transition, both and seize the opportunities which the new age sectors like artificial intelligence are going to provide to us, the banks will need to be at the forefront in supporting that happening. So I think it's a very big tick in my mind in terms of the fact that we have strong balance sheets with the banks. And also don't forget, maybe this is the strongest private sector balance sheet which you will see in the last 5-6 years. So the combination of a very strong balance sheet to the banks and also the focus on making sure that whatever were issues have all been cleaned up is something which obviously from industry side we are very happy with. And on top of that, if you add the private sector balance sheet strength, you can well imagine that that bodes well for us when we look at the 7% and above growth going forward.
Absolutely, and that 7% growth target outlined by the small review of the Indian economy that the Finance Ministry has provided, and viewers, with the Finance Ministry talking about growth above 7% and even setting targets in terms of what is likely to happen, $7 trillion by 2030. The IMF has also followed up by upping the forecast for India's growth in this year, and that kind of tells you how the entire world is viewing the Indian economy. Sanjiv Puri, apart from banking, as I ask you to rate the Modi government's handling of that, what kind of marks would you provide for the way the energy security issue has been managed by the government, especially in the last couple of years with the upheavals that we saw? What would you rate the government's performance on that front?
Okay, let me just start with the first one. As far as the banking sector, I think Dinesh has covered it quite well. But what I would like to say that, the government is looking at the resource mobilization more holistically beyond just the traditional banking channels. I think the intervention during G20 to see how the multilateral development agencies can be leveraged, particularly for the green transition, I think is a very important and strong step that the government has pushed, and I'm happy to see that it's progressing in the right direction. I think inclusion of the bonds in a global index, that will provide further impetus to resources within the economy. So this is really to say, I think I would like to really say that very happy, very delighted to see that the whole issue of resource mobilization is being looked at in a more holistic fashion, besides bringing in efficiency in one channel which was constrained in the past. Coming to the issue of energy transition, I think we've managed it extremely well, particularly at a time when there was runaway inflation in energy. And we've managed that very, very well with proactive steps and a continuous and very agile way of dealing with it. I think to supplement that, I think also the focus on renewables and the fact that India is on track to achieve its the NDCs that India has committed with the renewable energy sector. I think that's also a welcome step, and over a period of time, as the proportion increases, is going to provide greater and greater security. I think the open access rules, regulations that have come in, and this is of course another area where there is this bit of coordination between the implementation at the state level. We would like to see that happening very quickly, because this too can open up new avenues for investments, because it will reduce certain frictions insofar as the investment is concerned in this area. So I would say the government has really done well in both these sectors.
All right. Final word on the show to you, Chandrajit Banerjee. And the question that I have for you is, and this is in response to a sea-water survey that has been done on the eve of the budget, where a very wide cross-section of people who have been polled have said that they are feeling very optimistic despite the sting of inflation. The question to you is, how optimistic is the private sector, Indian industry, which provides the bulk of the employment in India, regarding the future and the economic prospects of our country?
So, I think what we strongly believe that we have seen a 7% growth over the last 3 years. We are going to see much more than 7% growth rate, much above, clearly a 7% plus growth rate in the next year to come and even the year after. And we feel very strong. The private sector feedback in our surveys, in the mood that we see is that much strong. And it can be much greater, actually, if we are able to really look at the way we have been the transformational change that we have seen in the Indian economy in the last decade. If that direction is continued, I would think that we should be able to achieve even higher rates of growth with a strong inclusion, which I mean a much more higher employment and employability, which is human capacity building. All of this would really transform India as just not from the private sector industry point of view, but I would think a very strong inclusive economic growth.
Viewers, the tone for the budget presentation was in some ways set by the Finance Ministry with that 7% GDP growth aspiration, that headline number, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi now talking about the full budget and the confidence and the optimism that he expressed. Clearly, the key point now is the fine print of an interim announcement, which will definitely provide us clear visibility into what will come this July. Mr. Dinesh, Sanjiv Puri and Chandrajit Banerjee, thank you very much for your time with us today. With that, it's a wrap on this show. We'll be back with more. Until then, goodbye.